Okay, so let's say you've got your exhaust manifolds out. Now this is a great time to inspect your motor mounts because you can see here is the motor mount on the driver's side of the engine. Very easy to access now that we've gotten that exhaust manifold out of the way. Replacing these with the exhaust manifold in there is a pain. But with them out of the way, we have great access to them. So take a look at your motor mounts and inspect the rubber for cracks. You can go from underneath with a flashlight and you'll be able to have a real good view of the rubber on these things. The same thing applies on the passenger side, super easy access. I found that the passenger side was fine, but the driver's side one was destroyed. Check this thing out. Barely attached at all. So these are some pretty gnarly pieces of rubber. So that's kind of like what it looked like when I looked through with a flashlight from the side. I could see that giant tear in it. That's what you're looking for, a tear in this rubber. And so now's a great time to replace your motor mounts. We stock these, I'll link to them, of course, in the description. It's pretty interesting. It's like a giant piece of rubber, but it's not just rubber. Inside of here, there's like a cavity that's filled with oil. So pretty interesting. This one, of course, doesn't have any more oil in it, long gone. So to remove and replace the motor mount, what you're gonna need to do is lift the engine up so that the stud that's in the top of the mount can clear that bracket on the engine. So that bracket of the engine is sitting on this stud and you're gonna need to lift it up enough to get this whole thing out. Now, it's actually a little easier to get the old ones out than it is to get the new ones in because these have compressed down a little bit over all these years. And so the new ones are actually sitting a little bit taller. So you're gonna need to jack it up higher than all it takes to get the old one out. You'll find that when you try to go put the new one in. So all you have to do is remove that top nut. And then there's two nuts on the side, 1, 2, okay? So you can remove those. And you can do that, and you need to do that on the other side as well. So, you know, this is something that's really easy to do if you're replacing both exhaust manifolds, but you should be able to get access to the nuts on both sides. It's replacing the whole motor mount that's a little bit more difficult when the exhaust manifold is in there. So there's the passenger side. You can see tons of room. Now, it may sound intimidating that you're going to need to lift the engine up enough. And I want to show you how to do that. If you have an engine hoist like a cherry picker, well, then you'll be able to just mount to the two lifting points on the engine. Here's the passenger side one, and then the driver's side one is that bracket that you already removed to get your exhaust manifold out. It sits right here. You can just go ahead and reinstall it, and then you can hook your cherry picker up and just lift the engine straight up. I mean, you'll probably need to remove your hood to have access to that, to have enough room. But if you don't have a cherry picker, I'm gonna show you how to do it with a bottle jack, like your factory jack that's in your car. That's what I used to do this motor mount. Let me show you where to put it. So in order to jack the engine up using a bottle jack or a jack from below, you're gonna need to get some access. The spot that you want is covered up by the Y pipe, by kind of right where this catalytic converter is. Again, this is an aftermarket unit. Yours is gonna look a little different than this. But if you can't get access to the spot that I'm about to show you, just disconnect the Y pipe from the main catalytic converter pipe connection there, and then you're gonna push it back out of the way. In order to do so, you're gonna need to unplug some O2 sensor wires so that it'll have enough, be able to slide backwards. Just follow these wires up to the top of the engine and then unplug them. And then there's one that you'll probably need to unplug, and it is, if you follow a wire, it connects on the driver's side of the transmission, like right along the side of the transmission. You'll see where they connect. You can disconnect one of them. That'll give you enough room to move this Y pipe out of the way. Then, just behind this main engine cross member, just below the oil pan of the engine, if you come back behind it, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to see this big piece of metal here, which is where your Y pipe, your factory one, was connected to. And then here's the bell housing of the transmission. And if you want to remove the passenger side motor mount, I found right there is a great place to jack from. If you need to remove the driver side, I put it right there. It's amazing how big of a difference just like 3-4 inches makes when you're lifting this engine up, because when you're lifting it from that spot, the driver side motor mount won't lift up high enough. And then when you're doing it on this, it will. So all I did is take your factory bottle jack. I got some wood planks, like some 4x4s, you know, some big pieces of wood to get it higher, and just so the jack would reach that point. And then I also used a little piece of wood, little piece of 2x4, and that's what I put up against the bell housing, just to kind of give me some height, but also to cushion it. And you can see there's the indentation from where the bottle jack was. So that's what I did. Up top, there's really not much that you need to remove in preparation for lifting the engine up. You'll find that the engine wants to hit this plastic right here, like the top of the intake manifold hits right here. So you can just pop this off and just slide it or completely remove it out of the way. It's just clipped on there. Like it's just clipped on to these two lines, and then it's pushed onto that stud. So if you just get a tool behind it and just pop it straight back, it'll come right off, that white piece of plastic. And then I also remove this top plastic piece around the fan, and that's just like locked in right here. There's like a little tab that you lift up right there, and then same thing on the other side, and then it's just sitting in here. So you just remove that, and then because that cooling fan's gonna want to come up as you're jacking up the engine. I'm further back now where the transfer case connects to the transmission. You can see there's the transmission pan. So we're just behind the transmission cross member. The other thing that I did is I got a big block of wood and my floor jack, and I put it right here underneath this nice solid piece of aluminum where the transfer case meets the transmission. I put that big block of wood here. I use my floor jack, and as I start to pump my bottle jack up front to lift the engine up, you're kind of tilting the engine back like this. We're trying to have it come up nice and straight. So I pump this part of the transmission and transfer case on the floor jack up a little bit as well, so that the whole drive line, the whole powertrain, it's not like this. I'm trying to kind of lift things up as flatly as possible. So I don't go crazy back here. I just pump it up a few times, help reduce the severity of those angles where everything is bolted together, and kind of help everything come up evenly is what I'm trying to do. And so that's my biggest takeaway for you. If you're doing motor mounts, the position of where you jack from, that's the key. It's easier, of course, if you have a cherry picker, an engine hoist, you lift this thing up, that's gonna make life a lot easier. But if you don't, and you gotta do it with just a jack, where you put that jack is everything. Because if there's kind of like a boss underneath the engine right below the crank bolt. If you try using that, it picks up the front of the engine, and the angle is way too severe, and this intake manifold hits the firewall before you're anywhere close to being able to remove that motor mount. And if you try jacking up from the transmission area, again, it's just not the right angle. Like this engine needs to try and come up straight, and you just won't get enough height if you try lifting from farther back, and if you try lifting from forward, or even from the sides. Even if you try putting your jack like directly on this piece of aluminum coming right off the bottom of the engine, I've tried that too. Couldn't get enough access to it. So those two spots that I showed you, that was the key for me in order to get this engine high enough. So all you gotta do, lift it up high enough to where the old motor mount will come out. You slide the new one in. It only goes in one way. You can see at the, you'll see that on the inboard side at the base plate, there's like these little indentations. Here, I'll show you on the old one. Those little indents coming out, there's a spot in the mount down there for those to fit into. So it goes like this, where those indents face towards the motor. And then these are your bolt holes. So as you can see, even on the driver's side where access is tighter, you can still get to your motor mount with the exhaust manifold in place. It's just a lot easier. You just have more room to work with if you are doing this job anyways. So that's why I wanted to point it out. It's a great time to inspect your motor mounts. While you're fitting the new motor mount into place, when you have the engine jacked up, make sure you keep your fingers out of the way to where if the worst case scenario happened and the jack fell out and the engine fell down, you wouldn't get your fingers crushed underneath here. So just like keep them clear as you fit this down into place. Now you don't be surprised if you can't get everything to like, you'll be able to get the top nut on, of course, just do that loosely, but the bottom won't fit in until you just kind of want to guide it and then maybe get these in finger tight towards the frame. But the little indents on the outside, they won't fit into their place until you kind of lower the engine down slowly, and you'll be able to kind of pull this or push it to make sure everything feeds perfectly into where it needs to be. Here's your torque specs for the motor mounts. For the top nut, 19 plus or minus 3 foot-pounds, and for the two side studs, 33 plus or minus 7 foot-pounds. Now you want to make sure that you do that torque spec when the engine has been dropped back down fully onto those mounts with the full weight of the engine on those mounts, then you torque it to those torque specs.